Today, I sit down with the Deputy Leader of the Green Party of Ontario, Abhijeet. We talk about his upbringing, his path to the Green Party of Ontario, the historic 2019 Ontario provincial election, which saw the first ever Green member of provincial parliament elected, and how the Green Party of Ontario would handle certain issues differently than the current Ontario government. With that being said, here is Cross-Border Interviews featuring Abhijeet. Usually I would offer my guest a drink, but as we are about 3,000 kilometers away from each other, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So We'll just dive right into this. Thank you for doing this. And my first question to all my guests is, where does your sense of duty come from?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for that question. I think my sense of duty comes from... That's such an interesting question. I think it comes from a place of childhood. I think it's ingrained deeply within me, especially through a very duty-driven family. My grandfather was an MP back in India, and he was, one of the earliest member of parliaments of independent India, and he actually was one of those rare politicians, who essentially was driven by ideals. And he had the humility to not disclose any of his accomplishments or his achievements. And later now, even to this day, we don't know everything that he accomplished. Most of the things we know from other people. He himself never told us. And I mean, that's the kind of ideal and model that I looked up to when I looked at, and even after he lost his election, he went back to working as a social worker and as a clerk for, a pharmaceutical company. So my parents didn't grow up my dad didn't grow up in any kind of ostentatious, luxury or anything. He grew up lower middle class, and that too in India back in the 60s. So that's very different from the Western middle class as well. And so he, those kinds of circumstances, I think, have infused a kind of perspective in me. And his fight for the most downtrodden in India, which is the lowest caste system, as it's called there, kind of informed my opinion of the world. And so my sense of duty comes from always looking for the little guy, because my identity and my family's identity has been shaped by that struggle.
So just to clarify here, your grandfather who served was your father's father? Or your mother's father?
That is correct.
Your father's father.
Father's father.
So did your father ever have a sense of going into the family business of politics as well, or was that not his game?
I think by the time my father was growing up, politics had become a very dirty arena in India. And so maybe he was dissuaded from that because of it. And so... Yeah, because but he has interest in history and politics and all that kind of stuff, but on a more spectatorial aspect as opposed to getting right into it. But no, I think he was more interested. And, he tells me his vocational journey, essentially, like he in India, like there's all, especially back in the day, there was almost no not having any plans for a career. He literally just asked his mom, Mom, I'm graduating, do you think I should go into commerce? His mom, my grandmother, said no, too many your older brother is in commerce, he's in banking, you go into engineering. And he's like, okay. And so he went into engineering, and so he's an engineer now. And that's how his vocational journey took him to where he is now. And it's so blasé and so simple. So they were products of very different times, I suppose.
So when did your family come to Canada? Because it sounds like your father was born in India.
That's right, and so was I, actually.
Okay.
We came to Canada in 2005, which is not that far ago. It's literally 15 years ago, and actually completed 15 years. Just what's today, the 29th? So 5 days ago, April 24th, 2005.
Wow. So
yeah, so I was actually 15 when I came to Canada. So I've spent as many years in India now as I have in Canada. So they're both equal.
But so how does a child from India decide I'm going to get into politics in Canada? Was it that sense that you knew from your grandfather about giving back and your family as well, or was it an election that was happening at the time? Because 2005 would have been provincially. You didn't have a federal election. Provincially, 2003, 2007. So you didn't have a provincial one as well. So
no.
How did you get into politics in Canada?
Right. So I got into politics a little later. I was obviously, just trying to learn the system before. I remember civics class in grade 10 was one of my favorites, just kind of getting to learn the system. And it's a Westminster system, so it's not that different from India's. And so it was a very easy way to learn. And so the transition wasn't that hard about just the systemic knowledge of everything. But the interest of it actually came about much later, maybe first year of university or like last year of high school. And a lot of it was driven mainly by the provincial election of 2000. When was that? So the two provincial elections ago, essentially. So 2018, then 2014, and so 2010.
Oh, okay. The election I lost my job in.
Yeah. And so basically, that was the one which kind of got me interested in it. And one of the biggest impetuses for me, like to push me towards politics, actually was, obviously my family history and learning more about my grandfather, but also watching the show The West Wing. I'm just a big fan. And that vision of a government working for the better of people, that's not, that's why I love Star Trek, right? Because it's a vision of a better tomorrow. It's not something rooted in reality, for example, that kind of pushes and grinds you down and be like, look, this is how bad we are. It elevates you and gives you a vision to aspire to, and so that's why I loved The West Wing, and that's kind of what propelled me towards looking for options. And so my first encounter with politics actually was volunteering and then working for a Liberal MPP in Ontario and here in the GTA. Deepika Damarla.
Okay.
Yeah. And so basically worked in our office, got to know the way politics is done in Ontario, and it was a great learning experience. And I have immense respect for Deepika. I think she's a fantastic representative, and now she's in the Mississauga City Hall. So that's kind of how I got into politics.
So how does your journey go from working in a campaign office for the Ontario Liberals to being the Green Party co-deputy leader?
Sure.
So because that 2011 election was a hard-fought election between the PCs and the Liberals, and there was a major issue around that at the time. There was two major issues, one being the gas plant scandal, and then also the other one was the sex education teaching in school, because that was the first introduction. McGuinty at the time, the premier at the time, had announced that. Going from that election to where you are now, so let's go through that process. So after that election, I'm assuming you were still in university at the time?
That's right. Yeah, I finished my undergrad in 2012. After which for 2 years, I was just sort of, taking a bit of a respite. I went and traveled a bit. I traveled to Ladakh, which is the Indian part of Tibet, essentially, and taught at a Buddhist monastery school for about 4 months. It was I taught like secular education. I taught science, math, and English.
So what was that experience like? Let's just talk about that, because that just opens up a can of worms, because I didn't expect to hear that from you.
Yeah, so it was actually one of the most important and profound moments of my life in terms of direction, because that's where I learned how passionate I was about education. And so that happened, like 2013 was kind of a rough year personally. And so I just wanted to get away from it all, sort of. And so I found this volunteering opportunity through something called HELP, which is Himalayan Education Lifeline Program. And they essentially have these volunteer opportunities set up where they pair you up with schools in the Himalayas. So you can choose either the Indian part of the Himalayas, Bhutan, or Nepal. And I chose Ladakh because I'd never been there. There's different parts of, Bhutan is hard to get into because of visa issues. Nepal I'd been to. So I was like, you know what, maybe let's try Ladakh, because I always wanted to go there, and here's an opportunity. And the Himalayas was one of my favorite places to ever go into. Like growing up in India, we always used to go to the Himalayas for our summer trips. And so just had fond memories. And so I decided Ladakh, and then we went there, lived in a homestay with a family of farmers, really. And, they were very sweet. Most of their homestay guests were, Westerners who were either Caucasian or of Indian heritage but couldn't speak the language. And because I could speak the language, I could communicate directly with them. And so we formed a very strong bond. And the school was like a 5-minute walk in the village, and it was beneath a little Buddhist monastery. And so the monks were my students, monks ages 5 to 12, the ones who were learning to become monks. And so these children essentially, basically. So
just on that, during that time, during those 4 months that you're there, you're engaging with the community, you're being able to communicate, like you said, with the residents of the community. What are you learning about yourself? Because I know you say you found your love of education, but what are you personally learning about yourself? Because like you said, you were going through a rough time in 2013 to go do this. So what were you learning about yourself? Because to do that, A, you're leaving your family, B, you're going back to your home country. So what are you trying to find for yourself, and did you find it?
Right. Yeah, I think it was just a sense of place in the world. I think that question of duty, I think, comes back to you, because I think essentially what you find is that even at your most even when you are at your lowest point of life, there is a certain regenerative and recuperative ability for the mind to heal itself when you help other people. And so I think that's something that really was driving me. And I think I also chose Ladakh because my family, we're Buddhists. And so I wanted to visit a place that is kind of steeped in the culture and get to know a little bit about Buddhism itself. We follow a different form of Buddhism, which is the Theravada style, which is more prominent in Sri Lanka, Thailand, and India. Whereas Tibetan Buddhism is more Mahayana, which is the more like Chinese, Korean, Tibetan Buddhism. And but just to get in touch with those roots as well. Learning about meditation, that was one of the biggest gifts there. Although I had started learning a little bit even in Canada through a temple that I visited in Mississauga. And just all those things coming together beautifully, kind of to form almost give me a sense of serenity that I had been lacking, and that purpose, that drive to essentially help people. So that, I think, that is, I think, the greatest source of purpose and duty for me is the ability to help people as best I can, because at the end of the day, that is what alleviates suffering, not only yours but others as well.
So after those 4 months, you decide, okay, I'm gonna. Was it just a 4-month term, or was it just 4 months that you stayed there and then you decided to come back to Canada? So what transpired just the 4 months?
Yeah, so it was they say that you can stay there as long as you want, really. But I had first decided maybe 2 months and then we go, and then I extended it to 4 months. So it was kind of arbitrary, but at the same time, it was also because I wanted to come back and apply for a master's program here in Canada.
Okay. So you come back to Canada in 2014, I'm assuming, or 2013 still?
No, 2013 still.
Okay, so you come back in 2013.
But I applied for a master's for 2014.
And now, what school, if you don't mind me asking? Because I've got to ask, because if you don't say my school, my university that I went to, then I'm going to have to boo you. So what school? Okay.
I went to U of T.
I'm a Queens man, so.
Oh, you're Queens. Yeah, sorry about that. But yeah, I did my undergrad at McMaster, but I did my master's at U of T.
Okay.
And I did it in education. And so that trip was kind of what underscored the importance of education for me. And so I decided, hey, you know what? I want to do something in this for my career. So
at any time, and I've got to ask this question because your father asked his mother, at any time did you just go to your mother and say, what should I do after high school?
No, because it was actually very much the opposite there. They're both my parents come from families that, like, my dad's side of the family, predominantly most people are engineers, and on my mom's side of the family, predominantly most people are in healthcare, and so either doctors or dentists, and so my mom wanted me to go into medicine, and I actually was the one who kind of opposed that, and so it was very much the other way. So you can see the generational divide there as well, about how different the generations in India are now as opposed to back in the day, and so it's very much indicative of what it's like now, the kind of decisions that are kind of rooted in your own ability rather than what your parents tell you to do.
True. So you're at the U of T, University of Toronto, doing your master's. At this time, are you still trying to find a political home, or have you decided that the Ontario Greens and the Green Party would be your political home at that time?
No, it still wasn't. I still had roots within the Liberal Party, and still had ties there with many friends. But kind of what was the kind of the moment that I decided no was actually pretty recent. It was when Prime Minister Trudeau reneged on electoral reform, and that kind of was the catalyst that kind of drove me away, because there were obviously things that I didn't agree with the party, especially the big machine that is the Liberal Party, there are things that you don't agree with that go on, but that was the big catalyst that I was just can't do this anymore.
Okay,
and especially because I thought of my grandfather again, and Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, because the first inclination is, if you leave the Liberal Party, typically you don't go to the Conservatives. Sometimes you do. If you're an MP, it seems like if you floor across to the Conservatives. But If you leave the Liberal Party, you would go to the NDP because they're a little bit more socially left of the Liberal Party. Because as the saying since 1993, the Liberals run to the left and govern to the right. So you think you would just go to the NDP, but you decided to go to the Green Party. So what?
Well, again, yeah. So I mean, it's important that you brought that up, is because I did look at the NDP as well, and I did attend a few meetings here and there. But what I found about the NDP that kind of turned me off was that there was a perpetual sense of anger within the party. There's just everything has to be fight the machine, and I mean I understand because the roots of the party are activist based, especially in labor, and so that kind of culture makes sense, but it wasn't something that was appealing to me. I found it too not stressful per se, but like too much driven by angst. And so when I finally then looked at the Greens, I was like, oh my God, like this is such a breath of fresh air, because the optimism and the hope driving the change aspect of things was very inviting, especially when I looked at Mike Schreiner. I looked at the GPO way before I looked at the GPC, although I knew more about Elizabeth than I did about Mike. But I looked at Mike's speeches, his events and the different interviews he did in the media. And it was just like, this man, weirdly enough, reminded me of my grandfather, who, was just kind of plain spoken, was just honest with the people and had a genuine sense of being. And so I thought that let's give this a look. Finally called and attended a few events, and then I actually called Amy Watson, who was then our director of political engagement, and then I asked her, I've worked in a campaign before, yada yada. Would you want my help? I sent her my resume and everything, and then she replied saying, actually, in elections coming up, would you like to be a candidate? And I was like, well, I mean, I'm in my 20s. I'd never thought that I'd be a candidate this early in life. But I thought about it. I talked to my girlfriend. I talked to my parents, and eventually I said, okay, you know what? Might as well do it. Why not? So that was 2018, and that was my first electoral campaign.
So let's talk about that 2018 election, because you ran in the riding of Mississauga-Streetsville, which right. For the listeners is Mississauga is just west of Toronto, and Streetsville is in the northwestern part of Mississauga. So right. You were going up against a incumbent who has been there since 2003. Sorry.
That's right.
So who I forget his name. I think it's Brian. Bob Delaney. He was the government house leader at one time. He I'm assuming well known in the community, unless if you're not well known to get reelected that many times.
Yeah.
The winds are changing in Ontario in the 2018 election. Kathleen Wynne's not popular. Mm-hmm. You have a big challenge on your hands for this election, because the Greens are not in the legislature. Mm-hmm. Why do it then? Because you could have said no to the person, but you decided, yes, I'm going to do it. So what was the final nail that said, okay, I'm going to put my name forward?
Yeah, so I think there was a three-pronged thought process that went into there. The first one being, I'm young. I have a lot of time to do this. I can, and this is an opportunity to learn. And so that was one of the biggest factors that went into it. The second one being, why not? I mean, if you are doing this just because you want to win and not because you want to make a difference, then you're in it for the wrong reasons. Electability and all those issues are not the ones that should be driving your decision to run for something. And the third one being that the main goal of the party in 2018 was actually to, get our foot in the door by making sure that Mike Schreiner wins in Guelph. And so that was a massive effort for on behalf of the Green Party of Ontario. And that was an amazing learning opportunity because all the lessons that we learned in 2018 in Guelph were able to be replicated or at least learned by other Green campaigns across the country as well, including PEI, where they went from, a couple of seats to becoming the official opposition of the island government. The New Brunswick Greens, who tripled from 1 to 3, and then federally as well. So all these lessons that we learned in Guelph were so instrumental. And obviously, Guelph learned a lot of lessons from the BC Greens and the New Brunswick and PEI Greens. So it's all a very cumulative learning process. And, as I've traveled across the country helping on different campaigns, I've learned that as well. But essentially, those three reasons were what drove me to say, yeah, let's do this. And again, even in my campaign, I canvassed my writing mostly in the evenings and sometimes on weekends, but most of my effort as well went to volunteering for Guelph and making sure that Mike wins, and glad I did.
But at the same time, it must be because I've put my name on a political sign before. To see your name on a political sign, to see your name on the ballot for the first time is overwhelming to anyone because you're putting yourself out there in a public way, and people, if your election was anything like my election, have defaced signs, called you, threatened you while you've put your foot on doorsteps. So to do that and to see your name on that ballot on election day or advanced voting day, what was that feeling like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was a moment of pride. I was incredibly proud of myself to be able to, and not in a overtly proud way, not over confidence, but just a sense of this is kind of amazing that, I would never have thought of doing this when I first came to Canada, 2005. And here I am. So, I mean, it was a moment of gratitude as well, to all those people who got me here, because obviously nothing you do in life is just the product of your efforts, like that entire argument of bootstrap, pulling yourself by the bootstrap. I heartily disagree with it, because I think all of our lives are documents of everyone's efforts to get us to the point where we are. And so I think that was something that definitely was going through me, but also it was a little surreal, like is just a moment, just this idea of you seeing your name and, the person, like when you go and give your ID to the Elections Ontario official and he sees your name and he's like, "Are you the candidate?" I'm like, "Yes, I am." And so it's just kind of cool, And so all those moments definitely very memorable. And yeah, there were obviously, signs were defaced. I remember one of my sign was actually burnt and in this neighborhood down like in Meadowvale. A bunch of people. But for the most part, it was a very positive experience. People were so kind. They were, and I think that's one of the things you get when you're running as a Green, is because, I suppose, especially back in those days, now we're becoming more electable, so people feel threatened. But back in the day when, we, especially in 2018, in a suburban riding like Mississauga, people are just kind to you because they're like, "Oh, it's a Green." And so, it's kind of like, I saw that the nastiness between the Liberals and the Conservatives was on high gear, but we were spared from that for the most part. And also in the debates, I represented the party in the Mississauga city debate, the Mississauga Board of Trade debate, and local Streetsville debates as well. And so the very first debate was, it was all right. It was my first debate. I did okay. I was pleasantly surprised with myself. And then eventually, as the campaign moved on, I started feeling more and more comfortable with it. Especially the biggest one was the Mississauga Matters debate, which was at City Hall, hosted by the Mayor Crombie, and it was a huge undertaking, and to be able to represent and kind of hold my ground against Charles Sousa, who was then the finance minister, and make sure the vision of the Greens came forward. It was a great moment, and I think a lot of people came up afterwards to me and actually said, because like most of those debates were the Conservatives and the Liberals sniping at each other, and so I was the only one sort of answering the questions, and so many people came up to me and said, "Thank you for being the adult in the room." So it was definitely a very humbling and enriching experience.
So I'm going to ask a question, and I apologize if it's insensitive. Did you your grandfather, is he still alive?
No.
Okay, I apologize for that, because I was going to ask if you had talked to him before you put your name forward.
Yeah.
Pardon me. So at this time, during this election, you're not the co-deputy leader of the party at the time, right? You decided to put your name. You decided to put your name forward in 2019.
No, so in 2018 itself, after the election, there were the party provincial executive elections. In September, we had a convention coming up, and so that's when the result was going to be declared. But a lot of folks came up to me and essentially said that they liked what they saw from me in the provincial elections, and said that perhaps I should consider running for deputy leader. And so again, even there, I was kind of a little dumbstruck and thought that, again, I'm just starting, and I am still pretty new to the party compared to a lot of people. But they just said, kind of should think about it. And so I did. And again, I thought, why not? It's a learning experience. I'm able to represent a party that I deeply believe in, that I think is the future of this country. And I think is something that should be represented at all levels, and with the enthusiasm and passion that I can bring to it. And so that's kind of what drove me to say, let's do that. And
did you talk to Mike beforehand?
I did, yeah. I talked to Mike, and Mike said, yeah, you should definitely go for it, because Mike's always encouraging to anyone who wants to run for any kind of leadership position within the party. He's incredibly supportive of especially young Greens, and he is a big reason of why I'm here.
So let's get into the meat and potatoes of this now. So Mike, being the leader of the Green Party, became the first sitting MPP in...
Yeah, it's Ontario.
Yeah,
MP.
Sorry. I even worked at Queen's Park, and I always forget that now that I live in Alberta.
Sure.
So first MPP in all of Ontario to ever be elected. That's a huge milestone for the Green Party. Like you said, all resources went into Guelph during that election. What has changed for the Green Party now that he's in Queen's Park?
A lot. Even the smallest things, like the amount of media attention we get, it's all earned media. There's we don't have to go about pleading to people to feature us in panels or things of that nature. There's just a sense of legitimacy that comes with a representative at Queen's Park, and so that has made it much easier for us to be able to capitalize and push our ideas and into the fore, essentially, and people are taking notice. There's so many articles written about Mike, about how he is the most effective opposition leader. Even subduing a lot of NDP attempts at times, because he is not, again, that factor that I mentioned earlier about the NDP, because it being driven a lot by anger and angst, after a while, it isn't as effective. It's not a sustainable strategy because the outrage after a while it gets drowned in the noise of it all. And so effective criticism comes when it's constructive and it's based on ideas of what you would do different. And that's what Mike's always been able to do best, is that he criticizes the government, but he does so in a way that tables an idea and a vision of what we would do differently. And that, I think, is very appreciated by most people. Similarly, even during the COVID-19 crisis, I mean, Mike has been appreciated and applauded for the fact that he has, supported the government where necessary, but at the same time also criticized it when they fell short. In his speech during the emergency session said it all. He said, I don't mind what's in this bill. I mind what's not in this bill. What's missing from this bill that's the problem. And so that's the kind of, balanced approach that's being appreciated by everyone.
So, okay, in a perfect world, your earned media would get you coverage everywhere. Ontario is a huge province, north, south, east, west. I'm assuming you have to take on responsibilities as co-deputy leader to be at events when Mike can't be. How is the outreach going, though? Are you seeing more people come to party events, or not right now with COVID-19, but since the election, have you seen an increase in memberships? Are you seeing more people say, you know what, it's time to give the Green Party a look?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing tons of interest. My social media, even in a day, I often at least get one or two messages from people who are just interested in working, and I have to redirect them to organizers and tell them, so our ability to take in the amount of volunteers that are and the interest that's coming in needs to be ramped up to meet it. Our capacity needs to be increased. Our memberships are increasing. We're way above 5,000, and this was last year. So right now, I'm sure it's even higher than that. And fundraising is fantastic. I think actually after the election, for a while, we were out fundraising the Liberals. That's just a testament to the fact of how well this party is doing provincially. And the Greens also are seen, again, like I said, as a very potent opposition, and the ability to essentially balance that opposition is a very constructive component of Ontario politics today. And so, I think there's a certain amount of outreach that's coming not just from the citizens of Ontario, which is, the most important part, but also all aspects of society as well, including media. I represent the party at public events. I represent the party for media interviews. Did a few of them even during the federal election for the GPC. It's definitely, as Mike actually gets much more busy at Queen's Park, a lot of the party building responsibilities especially fall on me and Bonnie, who's my co-deputy leader. And so a lot of the CAs and the on-the-ground meetings kind of things are the things that we attend and kind of build the party from ground up. That those responsibilities are falling more on us as deputy leaders, and also the rest of the provincial executive as well. So
you talked about it a bit, but I'm gonna the biggest thing I see with the Greens, and I want you to clarify this for me, is everything can be going great for the Greens. We saw this in the the last federal election. Poll numbers are on the rise. Voters are turning to the Greens. And then the moment, like a week before the election, things start to go wrong because people then start going back to the Liberals, back to the Conservatives, because they don't want the other party in power. So how do you keep those swing voters to say, you know what, take a chance on the Greens? Because let's be honest, the Greens should have won a lot more seats in the last election because they were aiming to get 10, potentially 12, but they ended with 3. Yes, 3's a lot for the Greens, but how do you grow when people are still so ingrained of, I don't want the other party to win, I want this party to win, because they're a little bit more safer bet than that party.
Right. And I mean, the long-term solution and the best solution to that is electoral reform, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why I became a Green, was because I think a fair voice is an important aspect of a fair society. Now you're looking at all the dynamics that go into a minority government at play here during the COVID crisis. And I think one of the reasons, I mean, kudos to the Liberals for all that they're doing, and I think credit where credit is due. But I think one of the aspects that we're not looking at is that it is a minority government, and a lot of opposition parties' input is being accepted by the government, and that would not have been the case if it was a majority government. So that's the beauty of a minority government, is that all these different parties can work with each other and make sure that the most amount of Canadians are represented in whatever the government does. And I think so. That's I think the appeal of electoral reform. And any kind of proportional representative system. So that's the long-term solution to making sure that more Greens win. I mean, if there was a proportional representative system in the election, we would have had more than 20 seats this past election. I mean, and then you can see the absolute inequity of this system in the fact that the Bloc and the Greens both got about the same amount of votes, and the Bloc got 30 seats and the Greens got 3. So that kind of discrepancy is very indicative of a very broken system. Yeah. The short-term answer really lies in the fact that I think you have to prove to people that wherever we've won in the first past the post system, it's where we were within almost like within earshot of winning in the past election. So the ability to show people that we're this close, and then people then take a chance on you. So you have to essentially have a long run campaign in mind when you decide to run for the Greens, and you have to build a credibility, you have to build name recognition in your riding, and over time people will trust you as your numbers go up, and eventually you'll reach a certain threshold, after which you are then now in the game.
We look. So Mike is a member of Party of One right now. In sense, he's a Party of One in Queen's Park. He has a great organization behind him right now. Looking forward to 2 years from now, 2023, 2021. Next year, 2022. 2022. So 2022. In a perfect world, and I hate to be the guy who asks to guess or to predict, what's a win for you? To keep the seat or to expand, double, triple? In an ultimate world, government. But
sure.
Let's call it what it is. If you guys can win 5, is that a win for you? To win double, what's a win to you?
Yeah, I think a win is making sure that our ideas are heard in the government. Similarly, so essentially to a minority government would be ideal. So I think it's not wrong to be ambitious, to look at forming government and saying, that's our goal, because why not? I think Mike would be an amazing premier. But in terms of maybe not this election, maybe the next election, but looking at the next election as what would qualify as a win, I think the best win would be to make sure that a green ideas and green values are incorporated within the very crux of the government. And so being an essential part of government would be a very a very effective way of delivering victory. I think something like what's happening in BC, for example, where the Greens and the NDP are working together, or even in PEI where the Greens and the Conservatives are working together. I mean, it just shows you how versatile Greens can be in our cooperative and our collaborative politics.
What's the biggest environmental issue facing Ontario right now?
I think the biggest one has to be well, there's a bunch of different ones. I mean, the biggest one obviously has to be climate change, and the ability to mitigate those things. But climate change itself, breaks down into so many different facets of how the problem presents itself, anywhere from flooding to forest fires to even pristine farmland being paved over because of development, or even the green belt itself being attacked. And so all those different aspects of environmental protections need to be put into place, especially now because climate change is ramping up. And what this crisis, the COVID crisis, has taught us is that we have the capacity to do that. We have the capacity to make these massive, drastic changes to our lifestyle that can be inconvenient at times, but at the end of the day, help us towards a more safe and a more sustainable life.
And one of the biggest, I would say, being from the Durham riding, I always get this wrong, Northumberland, Peterborough South, I think it's called, and the old Durham riding. Windmills were starting to pop up when I was just leaving, and the opposition to those was prominent because people just had misinformation. Do you find that misinformation is the biggest reason people just don't want to look at fixing the climate issue, or is there another underlying issue, do you believe?
I think it's, misinformation or disinformation, one of them. I don't know. Both really, because there is an active campaign of disinformation that is also being propagated by people who don't want climate change measures to be implemented. Thank you. Just had a little bit of a Wednesday brain fart.
No worries.
And so basically, that plays an aspect to the problem, but I think there's also a deeper issue of people just being a little hesitant to major systemic changes. But again, the information aspect of it is so crucial there, because that kind of tells you about how not hard this can be. So, for example, I think I don't want to drop too many parables to the COVID crisis, but one of the things that has been done so effectively has been the communication to Canadians by our healthcare officials, public health officials, and that kind of communication, because it is so ingrained within us to trust doctors. I think we need to have that same respect for climate scientists or for any kind of green proponents, because those ideas are also being driven by that exact same science. And so I think there's value for putting scientists and experts to the fore, and because I think people trust them way more than politicians.
I think when I saw the last poll of trusted professionals, politicians was second last.
Yeah.
So
I don't blame them, because there's quite a few bad ones, but then they make the good ones look bad too.
Yeah. So if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, you are the critic for the Green Party for Health, correct?
Health and long-term care, yeah.
Health and long-term care. Sorry, each province has health as a different name. So
no, because even here it was health and long-term care were one ministry, and then after I got the portfolio much later, they became two different ministries. But I've kept both portfolios. So.
Okay, so health and long-term care. With COVID-19 rampant in all of the world right now. From your perspective, how is the Ontario government doing with the COVID-19 response around healthcare?
Yes. Yeah, so I think it's a bit of a mixed basket because there are things that they're doing right, and then there are things that they're doing not that well. So the things that they got right have been, the kind of messaging that's been done by Premier Ford has been very appropriate, and the empathy that he's expressing is definitely helpful. The kind of solidarity towards public health officials, towards public sector employees in general, has been very refreshing. And the things that he's done not that well have been all the measures that have not filled the gap between the federal initiatives and what could have been. Topping up the payments for students, for example, from $1,250 to give in a provincial grant so that it goes up to $2,000 like the rest of the people on CERB, whether that's making sure that people with disabilities, who's on ODSP or OW, Ontario Works, are compensated fairly because they're getting paid so much less compared to people on CERB or even the student benefit. Then there's also the different initiatives like making sure that rent is taken care of and rent relief is provided. So there's things that the government has done well and things that they haven't done well, and we're making sure that we push them to do the things that they haven't done to make them do well.
What's the one thing you would want them to implement tomorrow? If you were in power, what would you implement tomorrow that would ensure support for all Ontarians across the board?
May 1st is coming up. Today is the 29th. I think it's important that rent relief is brought forward as immediately, because people literally don't have enough sometimes to go to that next month. We all know how precarious some jobs are nowadays, especially in this economy. And so people are scared that they won't be able to have their apartments to shelter in or their homes to shelter in for the next few months. And I think that's something, that kind of anxiety needs to be addressed immediately, and not be left to the benevolence of landlords. There needs to be the government did bring in a freeze on evictions, but they didn't ban them completely. So what that means is that the evictions evictions can't be enforced by the province, but if landlords decide to lock you out,
really,
they can. Yeah, so there's this weird loophole built in there, which means that the ban itself, you need a complete ban in order to make sure that landlords cannot evict you. But in this case, it would mean that so if you leave the apartment and someone then changes the lock or things of that nature, you have to take them to court, as opposed to because the cops won't come to enforce the eviction.
Wow, that's mind-boggling. I think it's similar to what is happening out here in Alberta and probably across the country. There's a few provinces that are exceptions, but I agree that people need to be looked after, and a roof over your head is the number one thing during a health pandemic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other issue also being looking after our homeless population, because how do you do physical distancing or social distancing without a roof over your head? And so those two things need to be immediate, because they are the need of the hour. So
and I'm going to turn a little bit of a page here, and I'm going to put my Albertan hat on here, and I apologize for this question. What's your stance on pipelines?
What's that?
What's your stance on pipelines? Bringing
pipelines.
oil to market, because the Ontario government now believes that they're a good thing, and we should be getting Alberta's oil to market because we should be less reliant on Saudi Arabia's oil. Elizabeth May, I think even a week ago, every day seems like a blur right now, so it could have been a month ago, 2 weeks ago, said that we should be relying more on Alberta's oil sands. So what is the Ontario Green Party's position on pipelines? Because I know.
Yeah. So I mean.
Oh, go ahead. I'll ask my next question next.
Okay. So currently, actually, we are looking at a bunch of different pipelines that even the Ontario government is pushing forward. The biggest one being the Enbridge pipeline in Hamilton, which is a fracked gas pipeline.
Is that line 9?
Sorry?
Is that line 9?
I don't know if it's called that. I just remember it being called the Enbridge, but okay. I think it might be line 9. I think you're right.
Okay.
But essentially it runs through Hamilton, and it's a fracked gas pipeline, and we are opposed to it because obviously fracked gas is an incredibly environmentally damaging way to extract natural resources, and on top of that, Hamilton recently had a sewage leak, which the government didn't. Both provincial and municipal governments didn't release that information, and it was leaked to the press, essentially, and that's how it came out. And so it's causing massive a massive deficit of trust between the government, especially when it comes to pipelines. And so we're definitely opposed to the kind of increase in fossil fuel uses. I think in order to transition to what we call a clean and caring economy, I think there needs to be a just transition where you take the skill sets and the abilities that oil and gas workers have accumulated over their years in the oil patch and deploy those to converting the economy into a greener and a cleaner economy, because that's where I think we forget that, you know, at the end of the day, as much as you can rage against oil and gas, there are people involved in the daily activities, and those people need jobs and livelihoods. And I think that's why we also need a universal basic income, because it's important to make sure that we provide a sort of safety net that catches all the people who can slip through the cracks whilst this transition is happening. So I think a universal basic income paired with a transition to a clean and caring economy, I think, is the way to the future, and will make sure that our country stays prosperous and can get even more prosperous in the future.
And now for universal basic income, for those who don't know, in Ontario, the previous Ontario government actually had implemented a trial version of a universal basic income with, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 cities in Ontario got that. The only reason I know that is because one of the communities was just north of my hometown. So I was like,
gotcha.
Dang. So
I know. Yeah. And that was such a fantastic pilot, right? This basic income pilot that was instituted was to be studied over 5 years and see the results. Many different pilots have been instituted, including one in Scandinavian countries, and the results have been very positive. You know, one of the biggest criticisms of the basic income is that people are not productive, or people will just, you know, stop doing any work whatsoever, or just will become a welfare state, or and I think that is a very misguided look at it, because what happens when you let people keep the income as well as work is people want to get more and more money, and so that drives your incentives. And one of the things that we saw in the pilot in Ontario before it was canceled was that so many people, you know, whether that's students who wanted to complete an education, whether that's people who wanted to start their own business, or whether that was just people who were kind of struggling to get day to day, and then now finally had the income source to stabilize their lives and then build on it to provide more input to the area economy. I mean, all those things are such great positives that are endorsed by economists on any kind of ideological spectrum. I mean, basic income was even endorsed by Milton Friedman, and wow. So there's these there's a certain political there's a opportunity for a political nonpartisanship to come into play here, because I think all political parties are for it, but for some reason or another, some political parties tend to oppose it, but their basis should be in favor of it.
But at the same time, and I Okay, I can see both sides of it. I agree that we need one, but at the same time, if we don't have the money for one, how do we afford it? Because that's, at the end of the day, everything comes down to money. So the Ontario government was massively in debt. It is still in debt. It is probably going to get worse with this COVID-19. So how can we afford a basic income for everyone when we can't afford to pay the bills?
Right. So I think so one of the things that Mike recently did was he hosted a big town hall, virtual town hall on Zoom and Facebook Live. Sorry. And it was on the basic income. And he had 3 guests on. And one of the biggest things that people took away from that was the ability to pay for things. And the easiest way to do this is to increase GST by 3%, and that will pay for it all.
GST or PST?
GST.
Okay.
Yeah, and so if you increase it by 3%, that will pay for all Canada for it to introduce a basic income. And so the solutions are right there. I mean, and you can do all sorts of innovative solutions on there to make sure that the poorest aren't affected by it, including some sort of progressive tax system. So there are incentives to do this. Today itself, the government, was announced that they wouldn't bail out any companies who had offshore tax accounts or invested in tax havens. That is indicative of the direction that we need to go into, is to have economic justice ingrained in this recovery of the economy, because we need to ensure that our most vulnerable are protected, because they're the ones who have been most damaged by this crisis. Because as much as we like to say that the COVID crisis is affecting us all the same, it really isn't. It's a very inequitable there's an inequitable distribution of suffering because of this crisis.
And you're seeing that every day, because the people with, and I hate to put it with the people with jobs and the people who don't have jobs, the people with jobs are still working, they're still surviving, they still have that money. The people without jobs, who are now waiting for the federal government to help them, are lagging behind because their bills are piling up, they're struggling day to day. So I agree wholeheartedly that this pandemic has shown that while everyone thought it was a kumbaya community, and even though it wasn't, it has shown that this society was not sustainable for a long period of time, because we are now seeing, and I don't want to use this word, but class warfare, where the haves and the have not, right? So,
right. Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely right. There's a certain amount of it's a great the virus is a great amplifier, right, of society, and the inequities are amplified. The kind of baked in experiences of people are amplified, including mental health issues, and things of that nature. So there's it's just putting into the fore problems that we ourselves knew to some degree, but never really addressed completely, including, for example, now you're seeing how poorly and disproportionately long-term cares are being hit. And that's because of the state of affairs that have gone on there for decades, that could have been so much better. And those kinds of care systems that we need to reform now going forward will be at the very center of this discussion.